You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Dodge Movie Podcast. This is episode 83, and we are going to be talking about the 1996 Cameron Crowe film Jerry Maguire, starring Tom Cruise, Cuba Gooding Jr., Renee Zellweger, Kelly Preston, Jerry O'Connell, Jay Mohr, Bonnie Hunt, Regine King, Jonathan Lipnicki, and a small little snippet of Ali Wentworth, and a very small of Eric Stoltz.
Eric Stoltz, man.
This film was also written by Cameron Crowe and filmed in and around the LA area as well as New York City.
Is this after Almost Famous?
Yes. The synopsis for this film, courtesy of IMDb. When a sports agent has a moral epiphany and is fired for expressing it, he decides to put his new philosophy to the test as an independent agent with the only athlete who stays with him and his former colleague. Thus, Renee Zellweger. The taglines for this film, all right, you give me your input. Which one you like? This is a new game. Everybody loved him. Everybody disappeared. The rest of his life begins now. And the last one, the journey is everything.
Last two are so generic, they're useless.
Yeah, that it could go with any film.
Any film. So the first one is kind of punchy. It doesn't really tell us what the film's about, but I like it.
It's almost like the opposite of Everybody Loves Raymond. Everybody loved him. Everybody disappeared. All right. I don't have any trivia. So why don't you go ahead and kick us off with your pickup line?
So this is the world, and there's almost 6 billion people on it. That's it.
And so the film starts out with his mission statement, I believe, correct? Or does that come later?
I think that comes later. I think it starts out with he's giving us a monologue talking about kind of the psychological situation he was in that led to him writing the mission statement.
Right. So I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit and then we'll step back. The aforementioned mission statement was Cameron Crowe said that Jeffrey Katzenberg wrote something very, very similar. It was an email that got leaked, and it was kind of like of the flavor of Jerry's mission statement. I was going to say, what was his name? That would have been embarrassing if I said it out loud.
Well, you are being recorded.
Right. And so that inspired him, and he figured, what is another immoral industry other than Hollywood? And he thought, oh, sports. I'll set it in sports.
So I presume that Katzenberg at the time of said email was fairly high up the chain, and that is just the classic narcissistic move to pound out in the middle of the night some feverish screed that you send to everyone and they have to pretend they like because of who you are. Haven't
people talked about like kind of like an escrow account for emails like this?
Yeah, that's a good one. You can save it to your drafts folder. So one of the key techniques, right, is not to type anybody in the 2CC or BCC lines until you've had your buddy review it.
Right. But I guess all of this requires a little bit of your own policing, which is...
Again, when you're at the top of the tree at a Hollywood studio, you probably don't have anybody that tells you, Jeffrey, this is a dumb idea.
Okay, so first I want to talk about the acting. This was kind of Renee Zellweger's big, debut. She was in Dazed and Confused and Reality Bites and Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, but I don't think it was as notable as this film. So this one kind of kicked her off. And she later said that the day she was cast for this movie, it had been so long since she had worked that she went to the ATM and she didn't have enough of a balance to make a withdrawal. So this was a good day for her.
This was the turnaround.
Yes. And Bonnie Hunt, who we adore.
Love Bonnie Hunt. Happy to have her on the show.
And she plays Renee's sister, Laurel, which, little side note for anybody who cares, if we had had a girl, I was strongly considering that name because it was my favorite nurse when we had our oldest. I love that name.
Still love Laurel. I will say I kind of considered Bonnie Hunt a scene stealer in this one.
Well, it's interesting. She said her character is the audience's point of view. So I thought that was interesting because she did not like Jerry in the beginning. She was very skeptical of him, thought he was not right for her little sister. And then she kind of comes around. So is that what Cameron wanted us to do with Jerry? Jerry.
Maybe, but I don't think Bonnie has clocked all of the audience because at least one audience member never comes around on Jerry Maguire. I don't like Jerry at the end of the film.
I do need to shame Cameron Crowe right here. And it was, I guess, the 90s. So I don't know, should we give him a pass? But I did find in the trivia that he did first offer, before finding Renee Zellweger, he offered the part of Dorothy to Janeane Garofalo if she could lose weight. And after she trimmed down, she learned that Renee got the part. Boo hiss.
Yeah, there are some other parts in the couldn't be made today and some writing issues we could talk about.
Okay, we'll talk about that as they come up.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that this is not an anomaly in Hollywood. I hope it is more rare today, but I'm sure, pre-1996 and even since, stuff like that has happened. And it just makes me sad.
It's an odd cast, though, of Janeane Garofalo, regardless of
totally
what weight class she's in. You wouldn't think her as a rom-com lead. Nothing against her, but her body of work, she's more known for her caustic wit.
Yes.
And I don't really see the character of Dorothy being smarter than Jerry and kind of taking the piss out of him as he goes through his day.
Agreed.
Right? So it's an odd cast.
Yep.
If that had come to.
So I don't know if this happened chronologically, but I made a note about, I love it when adults throw a toddler tantrum. I just think it's so funny.
It is kind of funny.
And we both remarked that the show me the money scene happened way earlier than we remembered.
I think part of that is because this movie is way too damn long.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to jump ahead. 2 hours, 20 minutes.
2 hours, 20. This movie should be at least an hour short.
Yeah, it could deserve some trimming. And so Tom Cruise throws an adult tantrum in the bathroom, and you just look ridiculous. And I'm not above this. I'm sure I've thrown a tantrum as an adult, and you look so silly. It's hard to take anybody seriously when they're literally gyrating their body out of frustration.
I'll be honest, I don't think we take toddlers seriously when they do it either.
But it's more age appropriate, so we give them a pass.
Well, it's less funny because it's less absurd, right? When you're 4, that's what they expect. But I will say he has a history after this film of jumping on couches and throwing public tantrums. So maybe not too far off. He's method.
Well, we probably will do a little, we'll make up for Top Gun, the first one. Or no, Days of Thunder. We just recently spoke highly of that film. I did make a note that the over-the-top sex scene between him and Kelly Preston, it felt like we were kind of overcompensating for something, but I don't know what that would be.
Don't know what that would be. What's interesting is there's a scene there which I consider to be both unrealistic and unnecessary, where Tom Cruise and Kelly Preston have naked dinner after they've had sex. They just pull up to this bar table that he's got in his apartment.
Yeah, it's like a high table.
Have a meal. And
it's not a meal, it's like strawberries. It's the most cliched thing to eat after sex, or before or during.
I think it was after.
It was after, but I'm saying
just bumped me entirely because
everybody would throw on a t-shirt or.
Well, okay, now I'm not Valentino here, but in my experience, ladies rarely parade around the apartment butt naked. Dudes, I could totally see doing it. There's probably 1,000 guys who are going to write in and say, I play video games naked all the time. But I don't see a woman like, okay, well, I'm all sweaty and whatever.
Because we're usually cold.
Yes, exactly.
So she would throw on a robe.
Right. She's probably, or 14 t-shirts and a hoodie and some comfy slippers or something. Yeah,
And who wants to sit on those chairs after we know what they just did?
And they're going to have to deal with that later. It's their chairs.
Okay, we're going down a road that we should not.
Well, I actually
Let's get back to our filmic.
It's really noteworthy. I mean, come on. If you're going to put a love scene in something, I think, to be fair to the actors, it needs to advance the story. It was
gratuitous. You're right. It was putting two pretty people, making them sit naked. Because just think, there had to be crew around.
Right.
There was nothing covering Kelly.
Or Tom, but I think we care less about it. But anyway, yeah, it was, wow.
It was gratuitous.
So this actually gets to one of the items that I have in the couldn't be made, kind of in an indirect way. But speaking of sexual things, there's a line where Bob Sugar, played by Jay Mohr, who does a fantastic job being an asshole. again, maybe method. He says, "I will rape and pillage for you," talking to one of his clients.
Right.
And I just felt like that was also a little aggressive. Now, I'm not saying that an agent wouldn't say that. That could be realistic dialogue, but again, that was 26 years ago. People probably didn't notice it, but it just struck me as it was a little aggressive, a little... Ugh.
Well, I think in light of some of the allegations posed against quite a few members of the sports community, I mean...
And Hollywood.
Not to defend kind of that kind of speech, but
right.
It could have been a figurative, not a literal comment.
I think so, but I also think that would...
But I think to not be tone deaf, if it were made today, they wouldn't have it. You're right.
Right. And I'm just thinking from a filmmaking perspective. And the reason I say that is because there are other parts of this film that I think are questionable, that are very disconcerting about how the women are treated in this film sexually. Mm-hmm. And so having that additional scene at the front, which I still think is kind of unnecessary in a film that's long, it just felt gratuitous. It was like, oh, how can I make Kelly Preston take her clothes off for me on set? Is weird.
What's interesting is you say that. I'm going to totally jump way ahead. I mean, we'll go through my notes and everything, but the scene near the, like in the back 2/3 or the back 1/3 with the divorce group, that feels very cliched.
Oh, yeah.
That there's these bitter women that just sit around and talk about how angry they are and, you know, the revenge they're going to seek on their ex-husbands. I mean,
right.
it feels so one-sided. Now, I'm not saying that divorced people don't have those feelings at some point. I'm sure you do feel, you are angry, because nobody gets married with the intent that that's how it's going to end.
I would hope not.
And so, of course, they're going to have, but it was this portrayal of these like sad divorced women just sitting in a living room, eating snacks, drinking wine, complaining. It felt very one note.
All it was missing was a bubbling cauldron.
Exactly. A bunch of voodoo dolls. Okay, so let me go back. Let's get us on track. The cinematography, holy hair light.
Yes. So
everyone had an angel halo behind them.
So I particularly noticed it when Renee Zellweger was at baggage claim. It was really pronounced, but I will forgive that because when Dorothy is telling Laurel that Jerry's coming over, they light Bonnie Hunt in the most gorgeous lighting possible. So full disclosure, I'm a big fan of Bonnie Hunt. I think she's very photogenic, but man, did the cinematographer do her a favor in that shot. They really did. Remind me a little bit of Glenn Close and The Natural. They really worked hard on those hair lights and the angelic lighting, which I thought was good. I noticed that they had a rain scene. And kind of bumps me because Southern California, it rains like half a day every decade.
Was it Chicago?
The scene where I was noticing it was in SoCal. And then later...
Wait, but it wasn't raining at the time, just the streets were wet, right? Or
no,
was it
later
raining?
The streets were wet, which presumably once you buy that it rains in Southern California all the time, you don't notice that. But I did notice that because I know personally that they would have had to have wet them. They'd have to call out the water truck and wet the entire street and keep it wet for shot after shot. So somebody made that choice.
I did notice that, and I noticed that they continued it on to the sidewalks and maybe the cars. Like I was like, oh wow.
It really went the full Monty on that one. And from it, this is more editing the cinematography, but I really did like the visuals where when they're on the plane, they keep cutting from Jerry in first class to Dorothy in steerage and back and forth. And I thought that was really well done.
Yes, I did like that editing. In fact, I wonder if I made that note. No, I did not. I have a note here that reminded me that the VO that opens the film, I made a comment. I think we even paused it. So there's a pause count for that it was almost like he was looking back and it was like his conscience and he was reflecting on maybe where he went wrong or where he could have done better. And so it's interesting that it started out with that kind of tense, because did we see that book ended? Usually when a film does that, then they end the film with the central character kind of with some VO kind of finishing the reflection, right?
He didn't, they do, but in this case, he didn't finish with VO. And if I recall correctly, he basically finishes with the "you had me at hello" speech.
But don't we get like a 1 year later and they're getting married?
Yes, that is true. I don't remember a lot of dialogue from that. That seemed more montagey to me. But I'll be honest to our listeners, I watched this film twice in the last few months. I just happened